The first 5,000 Sturmgewehr 44s ever fielded went exclusively to Waffen-SS divisions. Their soldiers stashed extra rounds in gas mask canisters, wore reversible camouflage 2 years before any other army, and carried a paybook that Soviet forces treated as an automatic execution warrant. One small card, buried in their kit, would later convict them at Nuremberg. Every item these men carried tells a story most histories ignore. Quartermaster Fritz reaches for the backbone of the Waffen-SS arsenal, the Karabiner 98K. This bolt-action rifle, first issued in 1935, weighs just under 4 kilograms unloaded and fires the 7.92 by 57 millimeter Mauser round. Each rifleman receives a single K98K, a leather sling, and a standard load of 60 rounds, 12 5-round stripper clips, slotted into 3 rectangular leather pouches on the belt. By the end of the war, German factories had produced 14.6 million of these rifles, with late war models stripped of non-essential parts to speed up production. On the firing line, Eric checks his ammunition. 60 rounds may sound generous, but after a single day of heavy fighting, entire companies reported empty pouches and scavenged the battlefield for more. The 5-round internal magazine and manual bolt action limit the rate of fire, but the rifle's accuracy out to 1,000 meters, especially with the ZF-41 scope, makes it deadly in trained hands. A shift comes in 1943. The Sturmgewehr 44, developed by Hugo Schmeisser, enters frontline service. The first 5,000 go straight to Waffen-SS divisions like Der Führer and Totenkopf, months before regular army units see the weapon. The STG-44 weighs 4.6 kilograms unloaded and fires the shorter 7.92 by 33 millimeter Kursk cartridge. Each rifleman receives one 30-round magazine, plus a spare tucked into a bread bag or belt pouch. The full combat load, 60 rounds in total, adds nearly a kilogram to the pack, but the firepower leap is dramatic. A single STG-44 can lay down a volume of fire once reserved for machine gun teams at ranges of 300 to 600 meters. After-action reports from Kharkov and Kursk credit the weapon with cutting enemy counterattacks nearly in half. But this new firepower comes at a cost. Rapid ammunition depletion and heavier loads put pressure on supply lines. As the war drags on, men improvise, stashing extra magazines in gas mask canisters and rationing shots when resupply falters. The rifle a man carries shapes not just how he fights, but how long he can hold the line. Ammunition runs short before the day is done. Eric drops a spent magazine into his bread bag, but he isn't finished searching for more. The empty gas mask canister, once meant for chemical warfare, now doubles as a secret cache. A single 5-round stripper clip fits easily inside. Most men tuck away an extra 30 rounds this way, barely enough for another burst of fighting, but sometimes the difference between holding or losing a position. A 1944 battalion report from the 9th SS Mountain Division notes, "The men have begun to store a spare clip in the gas mask tube. This practice has reduced the number of resupply trips during the snowstorm." Camouflage is more than a matter of survival. It is a statement. The Tarnhemd, issued to SS units in 1938, is a reversible smock, green-brown for summer, gray-white for winter. The propaganda films boast of its effectiveness, but Wehrmacht field evaluations are blunt. In snow, the white pattern often stands out against dark pine and churned mud. Some units paint extra green dabs or stitch patches from captured Soviet tarps. The cut is distinctive, with wide sleeves and a drawstring hem, making SS troops instantly recognizable even at a distance. This visual identity is both shield and target. Food is another front. The iron ration, weighing 1.1 kilograms, promises 2,500 calories, canned meat, sausage, chocolate, biscuits, and a tin of mineral water. But the math doesn't add up. Marching, digging, and fighting burn far more. Medical records from the winter of 1944 show an average weight loss of 5 kilograms after 3 weeks on rations alone. Fatigue and anemia spread. Medic Clara, tending to the wounded, writes, "They are not starving, but they are shrinking. Their faces grow sharper every week." Improvisation becomes the rule. Every pouch, canister, and pocket is pressed into service. The SS rifleman heads into combat with gear adapted for a war that no longer resembles the one his uniform was designed for. Close combat tools are never far from reach. The M24 Stick Grenade defined close combat for the Waffen-SS riflemen. Each man carried 2 or 3, their wooden handles built for a firm grip and a fast overhand throw. The warhead packed 170 grams of TNT, enough to clear a trench or scatter defenders in a room. Its 4.5-second fuse offered just enough time to throw and take cover, but not enough for the enemy to toss it back. Doctrine called for roll throws out to 30 meters, maximizing safety and blast effect. In reality, the concussion was most deadly within 5 meters, but fragments could wound much farther. By 1943, shortages forced a shift from leather to brown fabric pouches. Every scrap of leather was reserved for boots and belts, so grenades rode at the hip in canvas covers, always within reach for sudden assaults or desperate defense. After-action reports from the 1st SS Infantry Division credit grenades as the deciding factor in bunker and room clearing, especially when ammunition ran low or the enemy refused to budge. The Klappspaten, or folding entrenching tool, weighed 1.3 kilograms. Its steel blade locked at a right angle, compact for carrying but heavy enough to serve as a weapon. When rifles jammed or grenades ran out, the spade became the last line of defense. Eric recalled Kharkov. "No bullets left. The Russian came over. I swung the spade, one blow, and he dropped." Manuals even included spade-fighting techniques. Every scratch on the blade marked a story. Foxholes dug, hand-to-hand struggles, the silent weight every man carried. Every Waffen-SS soldier carried a Soldbuch, a small leather-bound booklet stamped with the SS eagle and his unique service number. It held more than pay records. Inside, pages tracked every weapon issued, every leave granted, every dose of vaccine, and every transfer from one front to another. The book was a soldier's legal identity, and it was mandatory to carry at all times. Losing it brought severe punishment. Falsifying an entry meant a court-martial. Orders required the Soldbuch to be kept in the left breast tunic pocket, always within reach for inspection or interrogation. On the Eastern Front, the Soldbuch became a death sentence. Soviet Directive 34542, issued in June 1943, authorized Red Army troops to check captured documents and execute any man whose Soldbuch identified him as Waffen-SS. After Kursk, Soviet reports described field executions based on nothing more than the lightning bolt stamp inside the booklet. The speed of that stamp, applied in seconds at induction, now determined whether a man lived or died in captivity. Eric remembered, "We were told, never lose your Soldbuch, but if the Russians find it, you are finished." Alongside the Soldbuch hung the Erkennungsmarke, an iron identity disc stamped with the soldier's SS number and unit. In 1943, the design changed. The classic SS runes were replaced by a stylized double lightning bolt, a move intended to speed up stamping for mass induction. Each disc was designed to break in half. If a man fell, one piece stayed with the body, the other went to headquarters to confirm his fate. Regulations specified it be worn on the left breast pocket at all times. Failure to do so risked accusations of desertion or espionage. Medic Clara, tending casualties near Kharkov, saw the fear these documents inspired. "The men clutched their Soldbucher, even as they bled out," she wrote. "They knew what it meant if the Soviets found them. Sometimes I hid the books in my kit, hoping to save a life." The paperwork was as lethal as any bullet, proof that in the Waffen-SS, identity was both shield and target. A single card, tucked behind the Soldbuch's pages, bound every Waffen-SS man to the regime in words that outlived the battlefield. The SS oath card, or Eidkarte, was more than a formality. Each recruit signed it at induction, swearing loyalty not to Germany, nor even to the army, but to Adolf Hitler himself and the SS leadership. The wording left no room for doubt. "I swear to God, to the German fatherland, and to the Führer Adolf Hitler, to be loyal and to be ready at all times to give my life for this oath." The signature was a legal act, one that prosecutors would later hold up in courtrooms as proof of personal commitment to the Nazi cause. When the Allies began their investigation after 1945, the oath card surfaced as International Military Tribunal Exhibit Number 12. In trial records, judges cited the card as evidence that SS men had pledged themselves to an organization declared criminal under international law. Defense lawyers argued that the oath was just a ritual, no different from any army's code of loyalty. But the prosecution pressed the point. The card was a shield, a weapon, and a warning. It blurred the line between military service and ideological obedience, making the bearer both a soldier and an agent of policy. As defeat closed in, many SS men tried to destroy their oath cards. Burned piles of paperwork turned up in barracks and field headquarters across Germany in April and May 1945. Still, thousands survived, seized by Allied investigators and entered into evidence. In the words of SS Judge Otto Heinrich, quoted during the Dusenfeld trials, "The oath was not mere ceremony. It was the legal tie that bound the man to the SS and through the SS to every order that followed, no matter the consequence." Each item, from the early issue STG-44 to the Soldbuch marked for execution, reveals how ideology, technology, and scarcity shaped the Waffen-SS's combat reality. Today, these artifacts aren't just relics. They're evidence of how material culture arms not only soldiers, but systems of belief and power. Share your perspective below.